Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined by Niall Stanage.
Hello, Amber. Our first time in the fancy new set with the big, beautiful bowl and all of that.
We love potpourri.
We do.
All right. President Trump is threatening to sue the Wall Street Journal over a story they published last night.
The story is titled, Jeffrey Epstein's Friends Sent Him Body Letters for a 50th Birthday Album. One was from Donald Trump. The Journal reports the letter, bearing Trump's name, which was reviewed by the Journal, is bawdy like others in the album. It contains several lines of typewritten text framed by the outline of a naked woman, which appears to be hand-drawn with a heavy marker. The alleged picture the Journal says it reviewed has a signature on it that reads, Donald. The alleged letter ends with, Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret.
President Trump blasted the Journal in a Truth Social post, writing in part, the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch personally were warned directly by President Donald J. Trump that the supposed letter they printed by President Trump to Epstein was a fake, and if they print it, they will be sued. Trump then said the Journal was told the letter was fake, but went ahead and published what Trump called a false, malicious, and defamatory story. He continues, President Trump has already beaten George Stephanopoulos/ABC, 60 Minutes/CBS, and others, and looks forward to suing and holding accountable the once great Wall Street Journal. It has truly turned out to be a disgusting and filthy rag, and writing defamatory lies like this shows their desperation to remain relevant. Seemingly fed up with the entire Epstein files situation, Trump also announced on Truth Social last night, quote, based on the ridiculous amount of publicity given to Jeffrey Epstein, I have asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to produce any and all pertinent grand jury testimony subject to court approval. This scam, perpetuated by the Democrats, should end right now.
So I'm interested for a start in hearing your views on all this, because it's one of these rare Trump controversies that obviously has roiled and divided people on the conservative side somewhat. One thing that strikes me just looking at the thing writ large is I think Trump has actually handled it very badly, and I think that's quite unusual because for all that I or others would criticize his policies, he normally has quite well-tuned political antennae. And I would say that in this one, for a start, the Pam Bondi now infamous quote about the client list being on her desk to be reviewed, that was bad for a start. But then Trump has at times blamed his supporters, at other times said, well, why do people care about Epstein anyway? And we're talking about a guy who's just a gross individual and a terrible predator. And then now with the Wall Street Journal, I think that he's honestly playing into his opponent's hands in a way, because we know that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein knew each other at this time. There's a very notable quote from the year prior to this birthday card from a New York magazine profile where Trump praises Epstein as a terrific guy. So he could simply say, well, this thing was part of a birthday album I was asked to put together. I then broke off contact with him. There we are. Now he's making it this massive thing. We'll see if he follows through with the threat to sue. We'll see if the Wall Street Journal countersues seeking discovery. But it seems to me just badly handled by Trump generally.
So I'll start with his general handling of the Epstein files and then get into the Wall Street Journal story, which I agree that the general handling of the Epstein files was done poorly by the administration because of Pam Bondi's insistence that there was a client list, but also this phase one binder with the influencers, which I believe we talked about shortly after it happened. And then Trump also saying that the people who care about it are his past supporters, insinuating, the White House insinuating repeatedly through background sources that this is a small handful of online influencers who make money off of caring about Epstein and not anyone who actually lives in the real world. I've heard from people who live in the real world who are not happy about this and are quite disturbed at what they view as a cover-up, frankly, of the Epstein files. But I actually think the Wall Street Journal story helped Trump in a lot of ways. I see a lot of his supporters now circling the wagons, saying that they don't believe that this letter is real. One of the things that they've been pointing to is the use of the word enigma, which apparently Trump has never used publicly in his entire life. And just the fact that it was typed out instead of handwritten, which Trump loves his handwritten notes. But I think it's sort of immaterial whether or not the letter is real. This story was really hyped up a lot There was a report by Will Sommer shortly before it came out that there was this major bombshell coming, that Trump had called the Wall Street Journal editor trying to get them to kill the story. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they found something connecting him to Epstein after he was accused of these sex crimes. And then when I first read the story, I saw that the date was 2003, and I thought, okay, well, already not super bombshell. We know that they were friends. And then it's a birthday letter that Maxwell was apparently collecting for his 50th birthday. So it wasn't this huge thing that I thought it was going to be. And then I think, his supporters kind of viewed this as him being the victim once again. So whereas he was the person taking a heavy part of the blame along with Pam Bondi for the failure to release the Epstein files, the Wall Street Journal story comes out, which people view as somewhat spurious, and they view this as more media bias against their president. And then he turns around, full circle moment, and says, actually, I am going to release the grand jury testimony and documents related to Epstein. So somehow we've gone from, we're not releasing it anymore, there's nothing to see here, my supporters are losing their minds over this and I don't know why, to supposed hit piece followed by, okay, fine, I'm going to release it now.
So there are some parts of what you just said that I do agree with, but I think where we differ, at least in our interpretation of it, is this idea that Trump is now cast as the victim of the Wall Street Journal. I see his reaction as being incongruent with that, because, as you say, the central substance of the Wall Street Journal story was not really that shocking. And his reaction, to me, suggests someone seeking to intimidate media outlets out of further inquiring into his relationship with Epstein. Because if all the Journal had was this letter, I think I'm less skeptical of its authenticity than you are, but we'll see what comes out in that respect. But if that's all they had, then let that be a swing and a miss, as it were. Trump, by saying what he's saying and talking about not only speaking with the editor of the Wall Street Journal, but pressuring Murdoch to not run it, that implies to me that it is the sending of a signal to stop covering his relationship with Epstein. And therefore, I think, well, what else is there? What's he really trying to cover up?
I think what he was doing was trying to rally his supporters to attack the Wall Street Journal on his behalf. And I think there's an argument to be made that if he had stayed silent, then it would have implied that this letter was real, that he was close to Epstein in some way, and maybe him being so aggressive sends a signal that the letter's not real. Vice President J.D. Vance has said that as well. I do think, I'm sort of divided on whether or not the letter is real, but I do think that the Wall Street Journal, if they had access to this book, probably should have printed the letter. They should have had a picture of it or a screenshot or something of that nature so that people could see it for themselves. I think it was strange that they did this big expose and didn't actually show what the letter looked like. And then I would have expected them to share other letters, perhaps, that were gathered in this book as well from other powerful people. They mentioned the Les Wexner one, for example, and those were notably.
Was in there as well.
Who was?
Dershowitz was in there.
That's right, and so I think that would have been useful for people to kind of evaluate, just looking at it. Does this look like Trump's signature? Does it look like something he would have written? That would have been, I think, a smart move from the Wall Street Journal in order to help prove its authenticity.
Yeah, I actually do. We find a point of agreement on that, although we'll see how it goes in the coming days, because I wonder, does the Journal have more information? Will it produce that kind of thing? Will it be able to push back hard in that way on Trump's arguments? But we shall see. Meanwhile, some disturbing reports coming out of the so-called Alligator Alcatraz, the conditions detainees are describing, coming up next on Rising. Alligator Alcatraz, the Trump administration's Everglades-based immigration detention center, is off to a rocky start. Just 2 weeks after President Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis heralded its opening, detainees and staff are reporting disturbing challenges at the facility, including swarms of mosquitoes, limited water, and backed-up portable toilets. The Washington Post reports, quote, "Without permanent structures, electricity, or running water, drinking and bathing water has to be brought in several times a day, but is still in short supply. and rainwater leaks into the tents that protect detainees' chain link cells. The New York Times also spoke with several detainees who say they lack access to information, recreation and medication, and experience infrequent showers, insufficient meals, sleep deprivation and illness.
So far, independent inspections of the camp have not been permitted, but state officials deny the claims of poor conditions at the camp. In an email to the Post, a spokesperson for the Florida Division of Emergency Management wrote, "The plumbing and sewage claims are false. The facility is in good working order, and detainees have access to drinking water, showers, and clean facilities for hygiene." Governor DeSantis is reportedly considering opening another facility in North Florida, and at least 5 other states are considering using Alligator Alcatraz as a model for their own detention centers.
So I think you've something to say on this one, Amber. This was an Amber Duke suggestion.
It
and
was.
I felt it was slightly off-brand for you to be suggesting a segment on the horrendous conditions that detainees face. So
Well,
what's your view?
Okay, so if we take the worst of the accusations, which is that toilets are backing up, they don't have showers every day, maybe they don't have toothbrushes, and there's some water coming in from the tents. I think these are not the sort of inhumane conditions that the detainees have alleged to the Washington Post. And also, when I'm seeing reactions to this from people who are generally supportive of Trump's immigration policy, they say, well, it's not going to be the Ritz-Carlton, right? This is a detention facility. This isn't anything unusual for something that was built relatively quickly. The people who work there say that they have been making aims to make sure that those tents are sealed at the bottom so that the water doesn't come in. But one of the things that really struck me in the Washington Post story, reading through it, that made me actually doubt some of the more aggressive claims was that there were complaints that the detainees were fed cold ham sandwiches. And I thought, really, you're complaining about having to eat a cold ham sandwich? I have that every day for lunch.
Would the suggestion be that some of them were Muslim, though? Or that it was the ham rather than the coldness
Well,
that was the problem?
according to the Washington Post reporting, the detainees and former guards described, quote, grim conditions and then immediately cited a cold ham sandwich. And there was no claim of any religious objections to that.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that one of the dispiriting things about the discussion about Alligator Alcatraz was, I'm sure you saw there was a congressional delegation who inspected it recently. And after they emerged, you had members of each party describing what sounded like a completely different facility. So I think Debbie Wasserman Schultz was one of the Democrats, and she was talking about how horrendous it was. I don't recall exactly who the Republican I heard saying, no, it's all fine. It's a perfectly normal detention facility. I am skeptical about the conditions because it seems to me that part of the reason for the name Alligator Alcatraz and for some of the comments we heard from President Trump at the start of its operation was all about sort of gratuitously, to my mind, putting in the harshest conditions possible and almost making a joke of, well, the people can't escape here because they'd be chased by alligators. You and I maybe discussed this, in fact, before. But the other point that I think is, to my mind, more important than exactly the conditions, because there's dispute about the conditions, is that the Miami Herald did a very good report into who is being held at this facility. And at the time, there were more than 700 detainees. And the Herald noted that, far be it from the claims that these were, as Trump put it, the most vicious people on the planet, about a third of those people had no other criminal record or criminal charges. They had violated immigration law. And so this propensity to justify conditions or justify a camp with this kind of gratuitously gloating name is that it's for the absolute dregs of humanity. And it's not, seemingly. It's, in a good number of cases, simply about people who committed infringements of immigration law.
Not necessarily, though, because it could be the case that some of these people have gang affiliations, which wouldn't necessarily lead to criminal charges or convictions. But that being said, I think reading the descriptions and then comparing it to past descriptions of detention facilities, both through DHS and HHS, during both the first Trump administration as well as the Biden administration, it all sounded pretty consistent with the conditions that occur at these facilities regardless. It's obviously a challenge to have that many people who are sort of transient, right? They're on the way out of deportation orders. it just seemed like it wasn't anything abnormal in terms of how these facilities are operating. That's not to say that they shouldn't have access to regular drinking water or things like that, which of course is under dispute by the guards that are there as well as the people who are staying there. But it didn't seem gratuitous or beyond what we would normally come to expect from a detention facility. And the Democrats who visited did admit that they saw a lot of the immigrants wearing wristbands, which had different colors to denote what kind of crimes they had committed. And they recalled seeing a lot of red wristbands, which apparently means violent criminal. So I would be curious to know what the group of people who do not fall into that criminal charges or criminal convictions, what they had been accused of outside of just breaking the law in terms of coming into the country illegally. Because like I said, it is possible that they had gang affiliations. But the beautiful thing about these detention facilities and Trump's immigration policy is that you can avoid going there. All you have to do is self-deport, and not only do you get to have the opportunity to then apply for legal status in the U.S. later on, but you get a $1,000 check on your way out.
I have to, I think, pick up on the gang affiliations point, because you just seem to be, with all due respect, asserting that out of thin air.
Well, I'm not saying that I'm not saying it's a certainty, but I'm saying it's a possibility that the Miami Herald might not have considered when they were merely looking at criminal records.
Right, but I mean, if you are saying, as Trump did, that it's the most vicious people on Earth or on the planet or something, it behoves you to provide some proof as to why that is the case. Now, this idea of gang affiliations is particularly on my mind because there was reporting this week on the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and it noted the questioning of a government representative about the evidence against him, which suddenly seemed much thinner than we had been led to believe. There was an informant who, on the fourth interview, allegedly talked about gang affiliations on his part, and the person interviewing him, the law enforcement or immigration enforcement person interviewing him, made no record of this at all on his notes of the interview, has suddenly decided that that was said. So that's why I'm skeptical a lot of the time about these arguments about gang affiliation. If people have proof, or even better, conviction of criminal wrongdoing, then obviously I think they should be deported. But we can't just cast allegations around out of nothing.
Well, the Abrego Garcia case, even beyond that point that you mentioned about the informant, had a lot more evidence. Maybe the government didn't present it during this particular hearing, but we do know, looking on past court documents, that Abrego Garcia's wife's brother had said that she was worried about leaving him because of his gang affiliation. He was picked up with several other ranking members of MS-13, including wearing clothing that denotes membership in the gang, such as the Chicago Bulls logo with the rolls of money on top of it, on the eyes and the mouth of that, which, I mean, that's inarguable to me that that is an MS-13 gang symbol.
So it's highly arguable to me that we want to arrest everyone with the Chicago Bulls tops on. Anyway.
With the rolls of money.
Well, the IDF has struck a Catholic church in Gaza, killing 3. We have the response to that from Pope Leo after the break. Don't go anywhere. The IDF is saying it deeply regrets a strike on the only Catholic church in Gaza. 3 people were killed with another 10 injured, according to the Vatican. The IDF is saying the cause of the strike on the Holy Family Church was, quote, stray ammunition. The IDF also posting on X that an initial review showed fragments from a shell fired during operational activity in the area hit the church mistakenly. The cause of the incident is under review.
Pope Leo renewed his call for peace in Gaza, posting on X saying, "I am deeply saddened to learn of the loss of life and injury caused by the military attack on the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza. I assure the parish community of my spiritual closeness. I commend the souls of the deceased to the loving mercy of Almighty God and pray for their families and the injured. I renew my call for an immediate ceasefire. Only dialogue and reconciliation can ensure enduring peace."
So you're a person of faith, unlike myself, and you're Catholic.
I am, yes.
So what is your thoughts?
I'm very sad about it, and I appreciated Pope Leo's words of sympathy and expressing his hope that they would be reconciled with God. I find myself increasingly frustrated with Israel's attacks in this war, whether it's any religious facility, not just the Catholic Church. And, you know, I find that what Israel has done is they have used certain instances of Hamas using things like hospitals or schools as perhaps shelter in which to conduct their activities, but have sort of publicly suggested that every time they hit one of those facilities, they can explain it away as saying Hamas was using it as cover. And I think that explanation only works so many times before you all are targeting certain places in order to demoralize the populace.
No, absolutely, and I would commend you for saying that, and I would also commend other people of a conservative disposition who I think are becoming more and correctly, rigorously critical of Israeli actions in a lot of these points. It's also this explanation of stray ammunition. I'm inherently skeptical of that because Israeli forces do appear to be terribly error-prone whenever there's a lot of outrage about what happens. I mean, there was the missile attack on the World Central Kitchen vehicles, which killed a number of people. That was an error. Just a week ago, or less than a week ago, in fact, there was a strike against people lining up for water, which killed 10 people, including 6 children. Oh, that was also a mistake. There have been a number of these things where, when there is outrage, it's suddenly a mistake. Meanwhile, there have been tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, an estimated 17,000 children. I would argue just a blithe disregard for civilian life. And so, I'm of course sad that the Catholic Church was hit and for those killed and injured in that respect, as I am for any incident where civilians are killed or injured.
And we know that Israel has incredibly sophisticated technology, that they are very capable of using intelligence to target people who are involved in war. We saw this with the attack on Iran, right? They were able to find out exactly where military leaders were meeting. They were able to apparently fly drones through windows and have very targeted strikes. Right. So it just doesn't pass the smell test that suddenly when it comes to the war in Gaza, that they are making all of these huge mistakes and that they're not able to target as precisely as they were in some of these other operations. Exactly,
and I think some of these explanations of error could literally be intended to protect or provide some cushion against eventual kind of war crimes charges for exactly the reason you mentioned. There's this level of precision, and yet they're hitting kids and churches and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see that a lot of people on the right are speaking up more about this, and I'm always disturbed by the blanket accusation of anti-Semitism when there's any criticism of Israel, whether it's people on the left or the right. That has been thrown around with so much carelessness that it gives the impression that you're just not allowed to criticize Israel.
Absolutely, agree entirely.
All right, Democrats got up and walked out of a Senate Judiciary hearing yesterday. We're going to tell you why. Stick around.
Why are you doing this? This is outrageous.
This is a kangaroo court. That's what we have here.
It is clear. There's a pathway to achieve what you're trying to achieve. But, sir, this lacks decency. It lacks decorum. It shows that you do not want to simply hear from your colleagues. This is absolutely wrong.
Cory Booker there fired up at Thursday's Senate Judiciary Committee meeting. You can see there as Booker was admonishing the chair that most of his Democratic colleagues on the committee got up and walked out to protest a vote on one of President Trump's most controversial nominees. That is, of course, his former personal defense attorney, Emil Bove. Earlier this week, more than 75 former federal and state judges from across the ideological spectrum sent a letter to the committee urging them to reject Bove's nomination. But that seems to have had no effect.
Republicans fast-tracked the vote out of committee by skipping debate on Bove's nomination. Senator Booker eventually followed his colleagues, and walked out of the hearing, posting this to social media.
Our job is to deliberate. Our job as the most deliberative body is to hear from each other. They cut off all debate, rammed through a vote. My fellow senators who now are showing their willingness to just bow to Donald Trump's will, to be able to undermine this institution in order to do his bidding. This was a day of shame for this committee.
Former Fox News personality Jeanine Pirro was also up for a vote during that hearing, and despite Democrats' staged protests, Committee Chair Chuck Grassley says both Bove and Pirro's nominations will advance to the full Senate for a final vote.
So a couple of things about this, Amber. I do think it would be useful, to say the least, to hear from this whistleblower, Reid, who, to my mind, is a credible person. and this is someone who was fired for telling the truth, in my view, about the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, where he said that Abrego Garcia had been deported mistakenly. Now, Reveni, we can't, I don't think, give the full quote, which was a very profane quote allegedly from Bove, which was not about the Abrego Garcia case, but was about the use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport people. And according to Reveni, Bove said that if a court sought to halt deportations under that we might have to tell the court to F you, I think we can say. He used the full term. Now, if we are now seeking to make a judge out of someone who believes that other court orders can simply be disregarded with a sort of middle finger, that seems inherently a problem to me. And it seems at least important to allow that to be heard.
Yeah, I think it's fine to allow it to be heard. It's also been denied by the Deputy AG, Todd Blanche, as well as apparently other people who were in the room when this supposed comment happened. So all of that should be put forward to the people who are going to be ultimately voting on his nomination. That's welcome to come in front of the Senate. But I think just to set the table here, I think the real reason that these attacks on Bove are coming is because he's, one, extraordinarily qualified for the position, and two, Democrats are, of course, worried that he is too in line with Trump's agenda. Extraordinarily qualified, he went to Georgetown for law school, served as a clerk for 2 judges in the Southern District of New York, and then was a top prosecutor in Manhattan for 10 years before serving at a very high level at the DOJ. So there's no question that his resume is there. To me, this is Democrats saying that no matter how qualified you are, if you have politics that we don't like, we're not going to support you. I
don't agree with that characterization, Amber, and I'll tell you why. I think that the resume may well be there in terms of his educational accomplishments and his career accomplishments, but there has to be some appreciation or understanding of the importance of some kind of basic ethics in this. It's not a question of politics in the sense of ideology. It's a question of him saying that you can simply disregard a lawful order of a court if you want to, because you're in power and then we can raise the middle finger. That's inherently, I would argue, disqualifying from this kind of position.
Yeah, but of course it is an allegation from one individual who is probably angry that they were dismissed from the Department of Justice, so we have to take that into account as well. This is by no means a confirmed accusation. Right. It has been denied by multiple other people in the administration.
Right, but the fact that it is an accusation from someone who themselves has many reputable qualifications and a reputable career path creates the imperative for it to be heard. You are right that other people, I think Todd Blanche is one of the people who disputes
publicly
it.
Disputed it, yes.
Now, that is fine. He would, of course, be welcome to dispute it in any kind of hearing as well. But the issue there is that there is some dispute about exactly the chronology of what Reveni is alleging and whether Blanche would have been in the room or not. They can fight that out if they are provided with the opportunity to do so. One of the reasons Booker, and yeah, I get the criticism of Booker that he's sometimes a little performative and overwrought. I'm not immune to that idea of criticizing him for that purpose. But the reason for the walkout was the refusal to even hear those things being discussed.
Yeah, and I think, again, as I said, I think that they should hear it, but ultimately it is a sort of he said, she said situation. The whistleblower doesn't have any recording or evidence other than their own word that this happened. So if you're going to have a situation where the whistleblower says one thing, firsthand witnesses say something else, I mean, we're not really any further than where we started, right?
Well, we have already, though, seen some emails and texts released that at least appear to give some measure of support to what Reveni is alleging, because it shows him and other people in the Department of Justice discussing what was being proposed, which was an ignoring of court orders. And look, we see this as, I think, part of a broader picture, because of course you have had President Trump suggesting that judges who rule against him should be impeached, people like Stephen Miller with this rhetoric about judicial coups. We have had a lot of attacks on the judiciary from within the Trump administration. So that is the context or the backdrop against which this takes place, and I think adds to the validity of investigation.
To be fair, though, the Supreme Court did indicate that lower level judges were improperly using nationwide injunctions when they should have only been doing that for the plaintiffs that were before the court seeking relief, or they could do it in the case of class action lawsuits. So Trump was right to an extent that the judges were going beyond their judicial authority. That was confirmed by the majority of the Supreme Court.
Yes, but you don't get to, under the law, decide that in advance, which is what Trump was suggesting. In other words, if you believe that a legal ruling is incorrect, there is, of course, a well-established pathway to dispute or contest that, which is the judicial process.
Which is what they did.
Up to and including the Supreme Court. But Bove's thing was well before the Supreme Court had ruled.
The alleged thing.
He was allegedly arguing that a order that at the time had legal standing could be ignored. That's different from saying, well, now the Supreme Court has ruled in our favor, so we can then comply with the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to an allegation, and yet the Trump administration complied with the injunction on the Alien Enemies Act. They didn't flout it. So that would suggest that, okay, either Bove was saying this in a silo, he's a top guy at the DOJ, so that doesn't seem likely. So it seems more likely to me that this was never raised.
But hold on now, because there's already a contempt case about Judge Boasberg, the judge who had suggested that flights needed to be turned back and they were not turned back. So when you say they complied, I don't really agree that they did.
Yeah, I mean, we debated that before over the international waters issue. So
we will leave it to some other time, perhaps. A new bipartisan immigration bill has some Republicans up in arms. We'll discuss that next. Stay with us. A handful of Republicans are facing backlash over their support of the Dignity Act. The bill addresses legal status and protections for undocumented or illegal immigrants and touches on border security, asylum reform and visa reform. It all comes amid President Trump's immigration crackdown, an approach that 51% of Americans disapprove of, according to a recent Reuters Ipsos poll.
The bill is being spearheaded by Representatives Republican Maria Elvira Salazar and Democrat Veronica Escobar. Salazar spoke about the act yesterday. Let's take a look.
Trump. Sir, the same God who saved you from death in Pennsylvania 1 year ago and who put you back in the Oval Office against all odds is the same God Almighty who millions and millions are begging to for some type of dignity, not amnesty. Sir, I believe that you could be for immigration what Lincoln was for slavery and Reagan was for communism. You have been called to do this, to fix this 40-year mess with just one signature, yours.
10 other Republicans co-sponsored the bill, including Representatives Mike Lawler, Dan Newhouse, Brian Fitzpatrick, and Don Bacon. Numerous other Democrats also signed on.
But others are not so enthusiastic and less eager to throw their support behind this bill. Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk writes, "This is a ruse. Do not fall for it. This will grind President Trump's mass deportations to a halt. This is worse than soft amnesty. This de facto ends the mass deportations Americans just voted for."
So my big picture view of this, Amber, is that it has really no chance of passing, as I understand it. And that is indicative of the way the immigration debate has moved. Because even, I would say, 10 years ago, the fundamental trade-off in this bill was sort of the orthodox framework for discussions about immigration. On one hand, there are to be more enforcement measures, e-verify, things like that, and more money of some description for border security, although a lot of that has already been taken care of in the Trump budget and spending bill. And then against that, in this case, it's not even a path to citizenship, it's a path to a de facto green card, is what is being discussed. That doesn't seem on its face to be an unreasonable idea to me at all. It was held as a sort of reasonable proposition for quite a while in this country, even though it never ultimately passed. But we just seem to have shifted from that position, which I think is regrettable, though I think it is probably a consequence of the massive numbers of border crossings we saw.
Exactly. I mean, by most estimates, there are somewhere between 20 million and 30 million illegal immigrants in the United States. And I think Republicans feel like the wool has been pulled over their eyes too many times, where there's always a discussion of, well, first we have to fix the immigration system and then we can crack down on the border and deport people who should be deported. And they feel like the second piece of that never comes after each amnesty package. And some of the issues that they've cited in this bill include the fact that it basically does grant legal protections, if not outright amnesty, for anyone who arrived in the country prior to the Biden administration. It also allows legal status for anyone under the age of 18, which is not necessarily a dreamer, right? It could be someone who came when they were 16, 17, had a life in their home country, and then gets granted this legal status from this bill. One of the other issues is that it supposedly provides exemptions for people who have gang affiliations, but the bill also explicitly states that it does not allow the government to look at various government databases in order to determine whether or not someone is gang affiliated. So it's pretty much a toothless measure in terms of those exemptions. The Daily Caller asked Trump about this, asked White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about this during yesterday's press briefing, if Trump would support the bill if it ended up at his desk. And she said flatly, there will be no amnesty.
It is interesting that this comes against a backdrop of polls showing some drop-off in support for Trump's immigration policies. And we've already seen some sort of media reflection on that. People like Joe Rogan's perhaps the most famous example, expressing real concern, to be fair to Rogan, about these sort of people being picked up outside Home Depots and so forth. And so there were a couple of recent polls. A Reuters poll, 41% approving, 51% disapproving of Trump's immigration policy, and an AP poll, 43% approving, 55% disapproving. So to me, given that immigration was Trump's strongest issue last year at the election, it is interesting that there has been that erosion in those figures. And to me, that says that some people at least are uneasy about quite how hardline a policy is adopted.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. At this point, I think with the way that the president is looking at this is, I campaigned on mass deportation. It wasn't a secret what that meant. People are, of course, going to have quibbles about some individual cases. Your gardener gets picked up, that's a bummer for you. But I think generally speaking, as we get to the midterms and then to the presidential election in 2028, a lot of those individual cases are either going to be forgotten or at least less important to people as they see the positive benefits of the mass deportation plan. Things like housing supply going up, housing prices going down, more American jobs. For example, the recent jobs report that came out last month found that for each month that Trump has been in office, there was a huge reversal of a trend under the Biden administration that I personally found quite worrying, which is that all of the job gains were for foreign-born workers and all of the job losses were among American-born workers. That trend has flipped under Trump, where you actually are seeing hundreds of thousands of jobs gained for American-born workers and foreign-born worker jobs decrease. So to me, this is an administration that is focusing on getting Americans back to work, increasing their status of living, their standard of living, and the mass deportation is a huge part of that.
One of our perhaps unexpected elements of agreement, I think, is that you and I, from differing perspectives, do, I think, share some concern about the propensity of wide-scale illegal immigration to create problems for people who are legitimately entitled to work here, and also leave people who are not authorized to be here more prone to abuse by employers. So all of that, I think, is a legitimate issue. What do you think in this particular case of the fact that, yeah, it's not that many Republicans backing it, but there are some Republicans backing it? Do you think that goes to some sort of divide within the GOP on it?
Not to the level that I would expect it to have 5-10 years ago, when there was the infamous Gang of Eight amnesty group, and there were a lot of Republicans during Trump's first term who were expressing misgivings about the quote-unquote family separation policy, which I don't personally call it that for reasons that we don't have time to get into here. Right. But now I think, you see the large bulk of the party mostly on board with this. And I think Trump has moved the Overton window on immigration, where it's no longer seen as outright cruel or un-American, although the left calls it that, to go ahead and remove people who are in the country illegally. I just think when people hear about stories of takeovers of apartment complexes in Colorado, when they see that immigration officials raid a pot farm and Democrats start defending the owners of the pot farm, completely ignoring the fact that there were multiple children who were picked up, who were working illegally and being exploited by those individuals. They feel like really the moral side of this is to grant priority to American citizens, make sure that people are no longer encouraged from making the dangerous trek to the United States and working in these exploitative conditions.
On immigration, I think that I am not as far to the left as people imagine I would be because I'm an immigrant. And I think that that pattern is often reflected. Trump, when he first ran, there was this prediction that he would get obliterated with Latino voters because he proposed such a hard line. But in fact, what happened is if people can vote, they are by their nature citizens, and therefore they have gone through the immigration process and often don't love people short-circuiting or simply ignoring that process. I do think, though, there is a separate question about the treatment of people who have been embedded in their communities for a long time, doing nothing wrong beyond the breach of immigration status, and how they are dealt with. And I don't think that people, of course, by and large, don't support illegal immigration, but I do think they want a somewhat nuanced or prioritized approach to who you get out, who you treat harshly, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I do think those personal connections might prove politically troubling for the president. I'm of the position that it doesn't really matter. They should go anyway. But one of the interesting things I've seen in recent national surveys is that Hispanics are actually the group that has moved most to the Republican Party since Trump took office out of any demographic group. All right, former Fixer Upper host Chip and Joanna Gaines are upsetting conservative Christians with their latest reality show. We'll be back right after this.
Former HGTV star Chip Gaines has set off evangelicals. Some in the Christian community cried foul after he and wife Joanna's Magnolia Network premiered a new reality show, Back to the Frontier, that includes a same-sex couple among the participants. Some on the conservative right are turning on the Gaineses, who are Christians themselves, accusing them of promoting an anti-Bible lifestyle while professing their own Christianity.
Famed Reverend Franklin Graham called it disappointing, adding, quote, "God loves us and his design for marriage is between one man and one woman. Promoting something that God defines as sin is in itself sin."
Gaines responded by posting on X, quote, "Talk, ask questions, listen, maybe even learn. Too much to ask of modern American Christian culture. Judge first, understand later / never. It's a sad Sunday when non-believers have never been confronted with hate or vitriol until they are introduced to a modern American Christian."
Others online pounced, with Matt Walsh reacting to Gaines' post, writing, quote, "Maybe you should endeavor to understand the basic moral teachings of your own alleged religion before you give lectures to other people about their lack of understanding." Lila Rose tagged the Gaineses, posting, quote, "Respect and love everyone, but that doesn't mean we affirm or promote every lifestyle or choice, especially as a form of entertainment for profit. Children deserve a mother and a father."
On the other hand, Slate magazine posted on Blue Sky, quote, "Go off, Chip Gaines." So look, I don't see at this in 2024 why there's a massive kerfuffle about a same-sex couple being included in some kind of reality show. The show, to my knowledge, is not an avowedly Christian show. It's a back to the frontier, the idea being sort of you leave modern life behind and you go to this. I find Franklin Graham a fairly risible figure to be objecting to this while he has been so enthusiastic in his support for Donald Trump, whose history includes 27 women accusing him of sexual misconduct and being found liable for sexual abuse in the Eugene Carroll case. So, obviously I have no objection to a same-sex couple being featured on a reality show or anywhere else. What's your view?
Yeah, I have some complicated feelings about this, just based on what I know of Chip and Joanna Gaines and the objections from the Christians who are looking at this. I think that there is a legitimate debate to be had from the Christian perspective as to whether or not putting a same-sex couple on a reality show is the same as promoting or accepting that lifestyle. I mean, they're contestants. It's not like they were chosen to host a program. So I think there is a little bit of nuance involved there. But I do think one of the reasons why Christians are so upset about this is that our viewers may not recall this, but a few years ago, there was a BuzzFeed News sort of expose about Chip and Joanna Gaines' faith, which effectively accused them of being homophobic and saying that because they adhered to traditional Christian values and were evangelical, that they were basically hateful bigots. And the Christian community really rised up and supported them during that time and made sure that they were not effectively canceled out of the home improvement space. And so maybe there's a feeling of a bit of betrayal or rejection that they had stood up for them when their faith was being called into question, and now perhaps openly platforming something that is antithetical to the faith.
That history may be part of it. I believe that one of the main objections was their pastor is opposed to same-sex marriage, but also I think believes in conversion therapy, which obviously is extremely controversial, to put it mildly. I mean, I just find the implicit idea, though, of the Franklin Graham kind of view is that being Christian means automatic opposition to at least gay marriage or any kind of homosexual relationship. Now, you're much more familiar with the faith community than I am. I certainly know people who are gay and Christian and who are church-going gay Christians. So, the Franklin Graham view seems overly narrow to me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for Catholicism. I'm not as familiar with evangelical theology, but it is considered a sin to be in a same-sex relationship, and particularly marriage is believed to be between one man and one woman. So it is incumbent upon Catholics to not promote that lifestyle. That is part of the catechism and Catholic teaching. So I think that's perhaps where Franklin Graham is coming from. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about that, but that's what it is.
That's what it is.
That's what it is. All right, and that's actually going to do it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.